They found him kneeling in his own mansion, begging a woman in a maid's uniform for mercy. The man who'd never begged anyone. The woman who served him tea just hours before. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it started, because every empire has cracks, and sometimes those cracks wear aprons. Sit down, child, and let me tell you a story about the shadows that live in the corners of great mansions. In the city of Palermo, there lived a man named Marco Moretti. He was the king of the streets, a man who believed that power was measured by the fear in people's eyes. He lived in a house filled with marble and secrets, where the air smelled of expensive cigars and old sins. Marco was a man of loud laughter and even louder insults. Among his many servants was a young woman named Elena. She had arrived from a small, dusty village with nothing but a suitcase and a heavy accent. To Marco, she was less than the dirt on his polished leather shoes. He called her the bird, because she chirped in a broken tongue he found hilarious. He would often sit at his long oak table, surrounded by his dangerous men, and mimic the way Elena asked to clear the plates. Please sir, may I take?" he would stutter, laughing until his face turned red. Elena never frowned. She simply kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the floor, while her ears stayed wide open to everything. You see, Marco's biggest mistake was thinking that a lack of English meant a lack of intelligence. He treated Elena like a piece of furniture, a ghost that moved through the rooms with a mop and a bucket. Because he thought she was simple-minded, he never stopped talking when she entered the room. He discussed shipping routes, secret codes, and the names of the men he intended to betray while she polished the silver right next to him. One evening, as the rain lashed against the tall windows, Marco sat with his lead enforcer, a cold man named Luca. They were discussing a ledger, a book that contained the names of every corrupt official in the city. "It is hidden where no one would look," Marco bragged, leaning back in his chair. He glanced at Elena, who was kneeling nearby, scrubbing a wine stain from the rug. Even if this little bird found it, she wouldn't know how to read the numbers. She can barely count to 10 in our language. He laughed and threw a piece of bread at her feet like she was an animal. Elena picked it up, thanked him in her thick, shaky accent, and continued her work. But Elena was no bird, and she certainly wasn't simple. Back in her home country, she had been a top accountant for a firm that handled very dangerous money. She had fled when the wrong people came looking for her, hiding her brilliance behind the mask of a humble maid. Every time Marco mocked her accent, a small spark of fire grew in her heart. She didn't want his money. She wanted the safety he had stolen from the world. Every night, after the lights went out in the mansion, Elena didn't sleep. She sat in her tiny room in the attic and wrote down everything she had heard that day. She translated the hushed whispers and the angry shouts into a map of Marco's empire. She knew where the money was buried, and she knew which politicians were in his pocket. Most importantly, she knew about the ghost key. It was a digital drive hidden inside a hollowed-out book in the library. Marco thought his mockery kept her small, but it actually gave her the perfect disguise. He was so busy laughing at her vowels that he never noticed her sharp, calculating eyes. The tension in the house began to rise as a rival family started moving into Marco's territory. Marco grew paranoid and angry. He took his frustrations out on the staff, but Elena received the worst of it. One afternoon, he tripped over her vacuum cord and turned on her with a snarl. "You clumsy fool," he shouted, his voice echoing through the hallway. "If you could understand a single word I said, you might actually be useful. Go back to your village and dig in the dirt." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Do you understand? You are nothing. You are a zero." Elena blinked, her face a mask of confusion. Sorry, Master Marco. I try better," she whispered, her accent thicker than ever. He pushed her away in disgust, unaware that in her pocket, she was holding the very ledger he had been looking for all morning. She had moved it while cleaning the library shelves. He was looking for a book, but he should have been looking at the woman he thought was a zero. The trap was being set, and Marco was walking into it with a smile. A week later, the police raided one of Marco's main warehouses. Thousands of dollars in illegal goods were seized, and 3 of his top men were arrested. Marco was furious. He gathered his remaining crew in the dining room, pacing like a caged tiger. "There is a rat in this house," he screamed, slamming his fist onto the table. "Someone is talking to the authorities." He looked at his guards, then at Luca, and finally, his eyes landed on Elena. She was standing in the corner, holding a tray of coffee. Her hands seemed to shake, and she looked terrified. Marco walked over to her and laughed darkly. "Look at her," he told his men. "The bird is trembling. She's too scared to even speak her own name, let alone talk to the police." He took a cup of coffee from the tray and poured a bit of it onto the floor. "Clean it up, bird. And pray I don't find out you've been singing." Elena dropped to her knees immediately, apologizing in her broken English. As she wiped the floor, she felt the cold metal of a USB drive in her apron. It was time for the final move. The following night, Marco prepared for a secret meeting that would decide the future of his empire. He needed to move his assets to an offshore account before the government froze them. He went to his library to retrieve the ghost key from the hollowed-out book. When he opened the cover, his heart stopped. The book was empty. He frantically tore the other books from the shelves, throwing them across the room in a blind rage. "Luca, get in here," he roared. But Luca didn't answer. The house was strangely silent. The usual hum of the air conditioning had stopped, and the security lights outside were flickering. Marco reached for his holster, but his fingers met empty air. His gun was gone. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. For the first time in his life, the king of Palermo felt like prey. He ran toward the heavy oak doors, but they were locked from the outside. He was trapped in his own sanctuary, surrounded by the ghosts of his many victims. He looked at the security monitors, and what he saw made his blood turn to ice. On the screen, he saw Elena. She wasn't wearing her maid's uniform anymore. She was dressed in a sharp, black suit, her hair pulled back in a professional bun. She was sitting in his office, feet up on his desk, holding his gold-plated pistol in one hand and a laptop in the other. She looked directly into the camera and smiled. It wasn't the shy, confused smile of a maid. It was the smile of a predator. Marco watched, frozen, as she typed a final command into the laptop. A notification popped up on the screen. Transfer complete. Balance, $0. She had drained every single cent he had. All the blood money, the bribes, and the inheritance. Gone in a single click. Marco screamed and began throwing himself against the library door, but it was reinforced steel. He shouted every curse word he knew, but no one came to help him. He realized then that the silence in the house wasn't just quiet, it was the sound of his world ending. The woman he had mocked was now the woman who owned his very breath. Suddenly, the library door clicked and swung open. Elena stood there, the gun held loosely but firmly at her side. Marco fell to his knees, his face pale and covered in sweat. "Elena," he gasped, trying to find his voice. "Whatever they are paying you, I can double it. I can triple it. Just give me the codes back." Elena walked into the room, her footsteps steady and confident. She looked down at him, and when she spoke, her voice was clear, cold, and perfectly fluent. There was no accent. There was no stutter. "You really should have invested in a better education, Marco," she said. "If you had, you might have realized that I wasn't just a maid. I was the person sent to audit your soul." Marco gaped at her, his mouth hanging open. "You're English. You speak it perfectly." Elena tilted her head. "I speak 5 languages, Marco. You can barely speak one without insulting someone. I've been sending your files to the International Justice Task Force for months. Tonight, the bird finally flies away, and you are left in the cage." Marco tried to lung at her, but the weakness of his own fear held him back. "You'll never get away with this," he hissed. "My men will find you. Luca will kill you." Elena laughed, a sound that was more terrifying than any gunshot. "Luca. Luca was the first one to sign a deal with the police. He's the one who gave me your gun, Marco. He was tired of being mocked just as much as I was. You see, when you treat people like they are nothing, they eventually have nothing to lose. And people with nothing to lose are the most dangerous people on earth. She checked her watch. The sirens you hear in the distance? They aren't for a fire. They are for you. I've left enough evidence on that desk to ensure you never see the sun again. She tossed a small silver coin at his feet, the same type of coin he had once thrown at her as a tip. Keep it, she whispered. You're going to need it to buy protection in prison. But I doubt it will be enough. By the time the police crashed through the front doors, the mansion was empty of its soul. Elena had vanished into the night, taking with her the secrets of 100 criminals and a fortune that would now be used to rebuild the villages Marco had destroyed. Marco Moretti was found huddled in his library, surrounded by the books he never read, crying like a child. He was led away in handcuffs, his empire turned to ash. People still talk about the ghost maid of Palermo, the woman who took down a lion without ever raising her voice. They say she's still out there, working in the homes of the powerful, listening to every word and waiting for the next man to mistake silence for stupidity. So remember this, child, never mock someone's accent. You never know if they are struggling with your language, or if they are simply choosing their words carefully while they decide your fate. The most powerful people don't need to shout. They only need to listen. Subscribe for daily Mafia boss stories where the powerful are exposed and the underestimated rise.